Well, welcome. We're going to be talking about leveraging custom view plugins to display remote API data in a Drupal view. And what I intend this to be is more of an overview rather than a really deep dive into coding. And part of that is because modern coding, I think, is moving much more toward leveraging AI tools. So if you know what can be done, what should be done, and how to prompt it and tell it to do, and then know how to check it, and then we'll talk a little bit more about that. So what I really want to try to do in this talk is explain the key pieces of this custom module, kind of a case study of what we did at the state of North Carolina, and kind of walk you through the key pieces of what you would need to do if you did something like this yourself. So a little bit about myself. I've been doing web development for 30 years now. I got into doing web development right when it was all taking off. The last 13 years, I've been in the government sector, first with the federal contracting, and then for the last 7 years, I've been working for the state of North Carolina in the North Carolina Department of Information Technology. So our particular team, which Dwayne is a part of that team, we support 94 of the state agency websites on a Drupal multi-site platform that's AWS hosted. And we save the state a ton of money by not using vendors. We have an entirely in-house team, and we provide this as a appropriated service for the rest of the state agencies. And I think we're getting the last big holdout. The Department of Motor Vehicles is actually coming over onto our platform, so that's exciting. I've been a part of 3 government projects to redesign websites. First, NIEHS, National Institute of Environmental Health Science, back in 2013 when mobile was first becoming a big thing, was part of redesigning that site. Then a few years later, the National Toxicology Program. I got into Drupal when we shifted from a CMS that was disappearing called Percussion and moved it to Drupal. And so I was a part of that project and then got hired onto the state, where for the last 3 years, I actually have been moved from front end to more back end development. I actually took Mike Anello's professional module development class 3 years ago. I highly recommend, if you want to learn how to do something, Mike is a fantastic teacher. And so he taught me about module development and getting into the back end, and that's pretty much what I've been doing since. I think 2 years ago, I did a talk here on writing migration scripts and migrating paragraphs into layout paragraphs, which we wanted a much better user experience for building complex page layouts, which now is all becoming irrelevant as Canvas is as soon, hopefully, to replace all that. So that's just a little bit about myself and my background. Just a little bit about AI is kind of framing up, and just open up for any questions about that. Really, I think what we've been doing for the last year at the state really has been leveraging AI heavily. As I was mentioning earlier, for about 6 months of last year, we were using it more in a sort of a chat capacity, like, how do you do this? And it would give you a chunk of code. And I would say last year, it was getting it right about 50% of the time. So, you still really have to know what you were doing. But starting around the beginning of this year, we have really been diving heavily into CLI, agentic, using GitHub CoPilot, found Claude, Opus really to have been the most useful. And I would say nowadays, it's getting it right most of the time, which has been things that used to take us days, sometimes even weeks, we are now getting done in hours. So it's just been a real force multiplier, I think. Knowing how to write good instructions and always making sure you've got your code committed so you have to roll everything back. So So in that context, this was one of the first projects that we actually really used AI to generate a lot of the code right out of the gate, and then went in there and made the particular adjustments to it. What we were trying to do, the problem that we were trying to solve is that we were hitting an external API. Most of the sites that we have been doing up to that point have been just building a site and not really referencing external data sources. And then we started to get into using JSON API, and what we were doing at that time is we were just writing custom JavaScript to render stuff we were pulling from the API. And I was like, yeah, that seems awfully wasteful to like spend all this time writing JavaScript to render something when Views, that's what Views does. So I wanted to use the Drupal Views UI and all the sorting and filtering, paging, and everything that came out of the box with Views, and it didn't want to replicate the data. You know, like we were talking about, we didn't want to migrate and import the data and then have to keep that up to date so it didn't get stale. So the particular project where I decided, okay, let's do this, was the governor of North Carolina has a boards and commission site at the time that was on a SharePoint server, which just is a horrible thing to use for website content management. So they wanted to bring this site over into Drupal, onto our platform. It had about 300 records. It had a form that people could sign up if they were interested in being on a board or commission for the state of North Carolina. So they would fill out a form. All that data would go into a back-end Microsoft Dynamics database, which the users were familiar with, how to manipulate the data, and view the data, and so forth in Microsoft Dynamics. They didn't want to change the back-end, but they wanted to pull this data and now display it in a Drupal site. So the bc.governor.ncd.gov is the actual site that we migrated over into Drupal, and that was what this project, what we were doing. So the solution to being able to use Views was extending the Views query, building a custom module that extends the query plugin base. So the query plugin base is the default class in Drupal, which does the SQL query to the Drupal database, brings all the data back and renders it, in a table row format to be able to be used by Views. And so with this when you override or extend this plugin base in a custom module, you can then reference any data source that you want, and then use the full power of Views to be able to sort and page and filter and do all that kind of stuff. So so this first step was creating a custom module. The basic structure of this module, and this is all actually in a PDF you can download right off the Drupal website, Drupal Asheville website. So you need an info file. In this case, I created a service for hitting the API, so I created a class that I could reuse over and over again as a service. So there's the module file, which had the hook in it, which we'll talk about. I created a service and then several custom plugins, one for the query and two for the filters. So that was the basic structure of this module. So we'll kind of walk through each of these pieces. And at any point, if people have questions, I've got about 30 minutes of content here, so feel free to jump in if you have a question. Again, this was about 8 months ago, so if I can remember, I'll answer the question. If not, I'll say, hey, go check AI. So the module scaffolding starts out with the info file, where you basically just have the name of the module, a description, a package name, the core requirements, and then in this case, the dependencies that we wanted to make sure was Drupal Views. And then also had a services YAML file, which basically defines the service that I created. It gave it a service name and then links it to the class, which is called API Tools. So that service would be available to inject. So that's just kind of the works there. So the three parts of what we had to do to get the data from the API is we first had to get authentication. We had to cover that. So we had to get a bearer token. So we would have to hit the Microsoft server to get that token. That token would last 60 minutes. We'd cache it for 55 minutes. And then once we had that token, we could put that into the auth header and we'd pass some XML in a request to go get the data and pull it back. And then the last piece that I talk about, it's a little tricky, is caching, how you cache that. There's multiple layers of caching. I actually got into trouble because I was caching it in two different places and wondering why it wasn't updating, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But those are the three sort of steps in the process. So the first step in that process is getting the access token. So I wrote a function called getAccessToken. We would cache it, check to see if the token was cached. If it wasn't already cached, then we would get the secrets key, load that in. Thanks. And then we would build the request, which basically was hitting the Microsoft tenant to get the token. We have a client ID. There's a secret key, which always make sure your secret key is not in your code. We think in this case we were storing it in an environmental variable, or actually in AWS I think has something that was storing that key. We build the actual query URL, which would change in this case depending on which API we were hitting, I think, and then we were saying it's client credentials. So we would go and get the bearer token and then cache that for 55 minutes and then return it if it wasn't cached. So that was the authentication piece. Any questions about that? It's fairly straightforward. So that was the first piece that needed to happen. And then building the get API data. So let's see. Here, first we're building the request URL, where we're going to what the API URL is. We're actually hashing that. It's because we have different URLs that I think are being hit depending on the filtering involved, and then caching that hashing that, so cache it. And then we're building the response itself. So at that point, we are making an HTTP client request. We are then passing the bearer token as part of the headers, and we're making sure that it's going to be in a JSON format to get that data back. And then once we make the request, we're using the JSON decoding function to decode it and then store it as the data variable where we're caching that. And in this case, we're caching it, for TTL is 300, so for 5 minutes, and then returning it if it's not cached. So that's basically the code for hitting the API and getting the data back. So any questions on just hitting the API?
5 minutes is not terribly long. Did that data change constantly?
I think the default on our different caching layers was 5 minutes across everything else in the website. To answer your question, no, the data wasn't changing all that often. And
but this fires off though when they try and do something that requires on it. Is that like it's
yeah?
On job,
I think the idea of caching it for 5 minutes was so that we weren't hammering the API continually.
Yeah.
So, but this particular page is probably not getting hit heavily. Like we're not getting tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of visitors to this particular site. It's a very small audience of board and commission. So If it was getting heavy traffic, we'd probably cache it for longer. But I think 5 minutes is pretty much the default of what we cache across every other page. So, let's see, where am I? So part of the format for getting Microsoft Dynamics is it had to be done in an XML format, which is kind of weird. Yeah. Not the normal way you would see this done. So I don't know if anybody has to deal with Microsoft Dynamics, this would be of interest to you. But we're using end quotes to make sure that we take care of injection attacks. We had to build this because there was department there was a drop down that would allow us to filter by a department or a category. So we had to, this couldn't be just a static query. And let's see, and I wanted to keep it in a readable, where I could actually understand and see it rather than mashing up. So using the XML hair doc, I think it's called, keeps it more of a readable layout. So that was just how Microsoft Dynamics actually wanted to see things. So the next key piece is creating an ID so that you can hook everything together. We're still in Drupal 10. We've been meaning to go to Drupal 11, but we keep getting hammered with big projects. so we haven't gotten, or hopefully be on Drupal 11 by the end of the year. So in the Drupal 10 annotation, you're still using annotations. So in the annotation, you define the ID. This is the key thing that everything else is going to reference, is that ID value. And then you're providing a human readable name for it, title, and help. But I've included Drupal 11, so if you're up to date, Drupal 11 is using PHP attributes, which is available after Drupal 10.3, so you can use it in that. And again, it's just a different syntax instead of using the commenting format. So you're providing the ID, the title, the help, just in a slightly different formats. But this is what you're going to use to hook into everything else, is that ID that you're defining in the query plugin. So once you've defined that ID, when you go into the UI to create your view, in the view settings, you're going to pick the title, which is the human readable. It'll show up as the human readable, in this case was Dynamics API. That connects, that's where you find the custom plugin and use it in that view setting when you create the view. And then after that, you pick all the rest of the table format is what we were using for the data layout when we created the page. And then this also later on, when you create the view, this is also where you can actually, one of the places where you can define caching under the advanced settings. So the fun thing I did initially is I actually defined the caching in the view as well as created caching in the custom plugin, and then wondered why things weren't refreshing and we had to do a cache rebuild every time. So figured that out eventually. The other pieces of the query plugin that, and again, this is extending everything from the base plugin. So the key part here is the add where, because I was having filtering. I had to pass in, the filter values that were being selected into the add where. And the ensure table is just returning a table. We're not really modifying it there, but just passing that through, extending the base. And then the add field is so that you can define the fields when you're creating the view, I believe. So these are just other functions that you're extending when you're creating the custom plugin. The most important place that you're extending is in the execute function. So this is where you're actually defining, making the API call. So, we're basically, the first thing that's happening is we're building the where clause using add where, and this is where I had 2 drop-down menus that we were passing in either a department, we were picking a department or picking a category for these boards. So the first thing we're doing is we're reading those filter values and including those. Then we're making the call to the API service where first we're creating API tools where we're referencing the service that we created earlier. And then we're calling the getXML function that we were talking about where we formatted it in XML and passing in the department and category values from the drop-down menus. And then we're making the call to the API, passing in the XML and it's specifying which API that we're looking for on the dynamic side. And then the third step is we're building out the rows, for the data that we're getting back. So this is the heart of it here. This is where all the important stuff is happening in the custom plugin. Any questions on kind of? So then the last really important thing that you have to wire up is a hook in the module file. So in the .module file, you have to define a query views data hook. And again, this is where we're creating a virtual table here. The query ID is the most important thing that we're wiring this up to the custom plugin. This is where it's saying, okay, this is the data. This is where I find the data for this virtual table that we're creating in the hook. And then registering all the fields where you're mapping the individual fields of data that are coming back from the API call and mapping it to the virtual table here. So that hook gets defined in the module file. Now the other thing that I did is, and there are a lot of different custom plugins that you can actually modify all the different parts of a view. So all of these are customizable if you just know which base plugins to extend. So the only other thing I wanted to do in this particular case was we had 2 drop-downs that we wanted to do in the exposed form filters that we had to go and get. I need to get a list of departments from Dynamics, so that list could change. So I had to go and hit the API, a different API, and say, give me the list of departments. And there was another for categories of boards and commissions, so that I had to do another call to get those category lists. And then I needed to create a custom filter plugin so that I could have those lists available for drop-downs in the Views UI. So that's basically what was happening here. Is again defining the ID of that, building the form element. So this gives you the basic thing, and then loading the value in each of the select options for the departments that were coming back from the API call to that API tools. So that was getting the data here, and then with a for each loading up the values into the select list. So that was kind of it was cool to be able to get all this data from Dynamics and then rendering it.
And not use any nodes.
Yeah. So
That's awesome.
so none of this stayed in the Drupal database. This was just hit the API call, cache it for. It could cache it for a day, probably, really, with the amount that it changed, but or at least an hour. Probably would have been if we were really concerned about performance or saving on servers, we could have done that. So the caching strategy is where I probably had the most trouble. So, we're caching the token for almost an hour, but the API data we were caching for 5 minutes. And we have a lot of different caching layers because we're dealing with almost 100 sites, and some of these sites are very high traffic. So we have, there's the page caching layer in Drupal, and then we've got Redis, I think, where we're caching serverless, and then we've got CloudFront, which is caching everything, beyond the server. So making sure everything bubbled up so CloudFront would know that something had changed. The key part there was making sure that you set the max age in the headers so that it would come through. And so there is a get cache max age function that you have to set. And so we would set that at 5 minutes and return that. And again, I had to go and clear out some of the other places where I was also caching, because one thing wouldn't see that the other thing had changed. So I had to clear that out of the actual view cache where I'd set it up in the view UI, and make sure that that got invalidated properly. So caching is lots of fun. Sometimes it's still, with all these different layers of it, I still find myself scratching my head at times about what's going on. Probably should spend some more time really figuring that out. So just to kind of wire this all together, so you've got a browser request, and then that executes on a view. You're getting the data from the API, making sure that the access token is up to date and getting that. Then you're going and getting the data from Dynamics, mapping it to the rows in the table, and then rendering it out, and then making sure CloudFront actually sees when things changes. That's sort of the flow of the whole thing. And are you doing API stuff? Like, are there any missing pieces here that you've had to deal with in the stuff that you've done?
This is pretty much exactly what we did.
Yeah.
We hit an API, we made a table, and then we used the view to render directly from that table. I think we used Views custom table. We used, I think, that plugin, but it's the same basic setup.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, so once you've got this all built, you enable your module, clear your caches, you create the view through the Views UI. Make sure you define all the fields that you want to be visible in that field. You add the filters. In our case, we had departments and categories that we had as filter user exposed filters, and save it and visit it. So see some of you can add. This allows you to add paging and sorting as well. Which we didn't get too complex with this because we're only dealing with about 300 rows of data, so we were just kind of rendering out that. So that's some of the normal things. So again, sort of wrap up the key parts of this is you have a query plugin base, which is what you're extending. The biggest thing is you're overriding the execute function there, and there are several other functions that you need to reference as well. You have a hook, which is creating the virtual table, and that connects your plugin via the query ID, and you have to make sure that all the keys for the rows and the tables match up to the result row properties, and that's where that all gets mapped, is in that module file. I also extended the filter plugin base, and again, there are plugins for all the different pieces of the view, so you could extend other things as well and manipulate other parts of the view. And just being aware that there are multiple places where caching can happen, and that could be a real source of trying to figure out how do I make sure that things get validated properly. And just the key thing to remember between Drupal 10 and 11 is that annotations are now changing over to PHP attributes for defining your IDs. So in a nutshell, that's what we did with this project and what we figured out. Any questions or anything that you're running into? That we got a little bit of time for questions here. Yeah.
Have you heard of a module called Views Remote Data?
No, actually, I have not. I imagine with you suggesting it, you're saying that would probably do what I just.
I mean, I haven't used that one myself.
Yeah.
From what I've heard of it, it sounds conceptually similar. I feel like, at least from looking at the project page, it basically says that like for whichever external data source that you're going to wire up, you almost like make your own little module. So it sounds like maybe the custom thing is slightly smaller in scope.
Yeah.
And it must give you some other scaffolding around that, I guess. So I don't, again, I don't know how exactly that compares to this. I was curious if you were aware of it, you'd be like, oh, we looked at that,
No.
and we didn't go that route.
No. If I looked at that, I might not have had to do all this. Though I enjoyed doing all this because I learned a lot by walking through this. So, So anybody that's watching this presentation later, check out Views Remote Data. That might do it.
I think I looked into that briefly and had a lot of trouble trying to get it to connect to anything.
Okay.
But maybe I didn't know any of this information to get it working. Like, it may need some work. I don't remember it because this is exactly what I'm trying to do.
I think we used, I think it was Views Custom Table. I need to confirm. I think that's the one we used. And it worked pretty well for us. But again, it's a very similar setup.
Yeah, nowadays.
There's 900 modules, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of modules, but nowadays with AI, it's so easy.
Right.
Like doing most of this
Yeah.
actually only took us a week or I think a couple of weeks to get this all wired up and making sure.
Yeah.
We were working with a vendor who we would say, hey. We need to figure out what we need to hear, and then we'd have to wait a couple hours for this person to get back to us. But making the custom web form actually is what really was a lot more painful and a lot more involved.
I feel like that raises the larger question of is there as much of a need for all these custom modules and plugins and things if the AI can just do them,
Yeah.
Well, for those of us that can't use AI yet.
Yeah.
I apologize. There's clearly still a use for it, but it, will that decrease over time?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Or MCP is.
Yeah. You can just.
How is AI adoption going in the different places? Are people worried about it?
We have a weekly meeting where we update stuff. We got one guy that's really on it, and he's here. The rest of us are here. For visual of other people, we got one guy that's great. The rest of us are kind of trying to keep up. But we're trying to integrate it as much as we possibly can. Our company's kind of not jumping in blindly, but jumping in carefully. So we have approved versions of Claude that we can use that are kind of locked down a little bit, and the MCP to the Google is kind of locked down a little bit. So they're trying to lock it down in different places, and we raise our hand and go, hey, you locked me out of everything, and I'll kind of update it. So it's a constant state of flux, but we're trying to implement in a safe, but in a safe way that still lets us build quickly.
Yeah. Anybody else?
We've been told we're supposed to start using it, but haven't been allocated any money to start using it. So they're just use your personal accounts.
Oh, that's not good.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
How many people are using?
This guy yesterday was talking about one that you can get started for $1 a month.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
What was the name of that? Just.
I can't remember. It was code.
I told him to do a lightning talk about it, so hopefully.
Yeah, I guess there are a lot of ways you can use it. We're using GitHub Enterprise, so that's. I don't know if GitLab offers similar services, but GitHub has been really good because you can actually use all the models. We get a certain amount of tokens, which we have one master power user who's our team lead, who really is on top of all this stuff, and the rest of us are, over the last year, have been starting to catch up and learn.
It's hard to keep up with that and your jobs, right?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm giving a talk at 4:15, one with the World Cup at 5.
Yeah, there you go.
But yeah, we're talking about running AI on the local.
Awesome.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
And some other options like that. So, that.
Are you using the minis, the
Yeah, so there's there's the different models, but just some different
Awesome.
things about
Find out.
Yeah. I will be there.
I'll be making it up as I'm going. So.
Awesome.
Well, I think we're all learning. Like,
Yeah. Well, I mean, oh, sorry.
No, keep going.
I was the good thing about the local models is you don't spend money. Like you don't have a token cost. It's all
Right.
contained on your one. You have to pay for like the not usage, but like the power. But that's nothing compared to the tokens. If you can find a model that'll get you awesome results, like I'm interested in that.
Yeah.
yeah.
How much iteration did this go through in that week? And
There was a couple of weeks, but
yeah.
yeah, I mean, you would build a piece, make sure that you're getting the data. Used Postman a lot of times, like just to test the queries.
Yeah, compare
Like
what
I
you're
would,
getting versus.
I would create the XML, serialize it, to feed it through. So initial testing was just using Postman to, test to make sure that I was getting, I was getting some data back. So there was the iterations were more about making sure that we had stuff, we were requesting the right things. And because we were working with somebody else, there was time delays, and like, hey, is this query written the right way?
I have like 5 emails right now.
Yeah. So I think the more time-consuming part was trying to make sure that we got everything formatted correctly.
Because one of the things that I like about AI is that it will comment out
Yeah.
as it goes, but also the more I work on something, then it will override the
We'll
comments.
update the comments. So it's like updating
You
your
lost these
documentation
really
a little bit.
good descriptive steps that was like, as a new developer, it was like...
Yeah, one of the things that's really important about using AI that we're learning, and I've been learning this from the guy that really knows it, is the longer your context window grows, the more it's summarizing things in the background and losing things. So you can actually tell the AI, remember this, like write this to your instruction file so that you don't forget. Like you can tell it key parts of what it needs to remember and make sure that you're summarizing an instruction set that it can keep referencing so it doesn't lose things as a context window.
Only about 5 minutes.
Oh yeah.
I was just going to say, one of the things that I find works well sometimes is like, particularly if I'm working on a module, I'll say like, create an HSMD file that
Yes.
like documents
Yes.
the technical architecture, and then that way, if I open a fresh tab, it still has that kind of like foundational understanding. Or the other thing I've done sometimes, if like I've got one thing but I want to sort of do it in chunks, is I'll like basically make a markdown file that has like the entire scope of what I want to do, and then I'll say like, let's do this one piece.
Break into
And then
phases.
it'll like, and then say like update the project file once you've got this done or whatever, and then so that way like it's a bit of a running counter, but like in a compact way, it sort of has that like history of like the things that came before and all that stuff too. So,
And you clear your chat whenever you hit whatever number you're
yeah.
comfortable with.
I find that just making sure you're writing very clear prompts, like I want you to look at this file, this line of code, using this ID,
I'm curious, could this be, and I know this sounds really dumb, but there's a need for it in my area, is to build this as a query for the API to pull in to be a pass-through for another API to pull in. Is that even something that, because we have data that
Yeah.
cannot be pulled directly, it has to be pulled through secure servers.
Okay.
So only the secure server has access to it, but this data has to be pulled from here, so we have to have a pass-through.
Yeah, I mean,
So
I would
could this
think you.
possibly be like built as an API hub to like pull information, not store it?
Can it all be done on the same server, or do you have to go to another server?
No,
That
they all
goes
have
to
be
another.
separate servers on separate domains in separate sections due to security regulations.
So you got to have something written on this server that makes the first call, and then
Calls,
you've got.
and then
So you
calls,
basically have an
and
API
calls.
that calls an API.
Yeah.
That sounds like fun,
Oh,
but
okay.
it sounds doable.
Yeah. Well, I've been building nodes. It's pull it, have it,
have it stored
ready,
here.
and have it pass.
Yeah.
But if I can not keep that extra FERPA data and so forth, it would be really nice.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we're just about at the end of the time. Any final questions before I press the button? Well, thanks. Thanks for all coming.
I have a
Yep.
question.
Yep.
Okay, so my team, we are chat. We are the first stage of that. We haven't really gotten into the IDE sort of stuff like that.
Yep.
And so I'm assuming that was probably new for your team. How did you guys kind of communicate best practices? What type of prompts worked out well?
For AI.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not sure that we're still figuring out a lot of that, and we're kind of learning from each other. The IDEs that we're using vary. I mean, a lot of us are using Visual Code, Visual Studio Code, VS Code, VS Code. I'm a PHP Storm guy, so I'm a little bit of a rebel on my team, but I'm just used to it. So I think that part we're talking about, like the agents markdown and figuring out how to write. We have one of our DevOps guys there's a Drupal skill or markdown that you can load in as a part of your environment. I forget the name of it.
You also can have like a plugin repo. So you can have a repo that's like a Claude plugin, and that repo can have a bunch of skills. And then you can have like a centralized place where your team can have those skills, and they can kind of edit it there, but then you can use it on all your projects by just typing like /plugin, and Cursor does it too. So
Yeah.
that's what we're trying to get to, but we haven't got it yet. We tried to, like, on one project, like I just put all my skills into the project, and it's kind of helpful, but I think it's, I don't know, we're almost finding that every developer kind of has their own little nuances of their own skills, but there's also like skills that we want to share. So like we're trying to find the balance between that, and figure out how we're supposed to share and communicate with everybody.
Honestly, we're about 3 or 4 months into really leveraging agentic CLI. We've kind of made the big jump, and it's been amazing what you can get done. But I think figuring out best practices, we're still.
Can you plug the Composer plugin that Amber and Angie have?
Is it the Drupal best practices? The AI best
Yes.
practices? Yes. We also have AI best practices on Drupal.org, and it is a repository of skills that are Drupal best practice. So it's kind of what we've been talking about, and that could be a good centralized location for it.
Yeah.
Is there any way to share that?
Well,
How about that Asheville Camp Slack? Yeah.
Well, there is the AI Learners channel within the
Yes.
Drupal.
I tried to find that yesterday after Mike mentioned it.
AI-Learners, I think you could just search in the top.
It's so if you go to Drupal.org/projects, AI_best_practices.
All right. Well, we'll wrap on that note. So that sounds good. Thanks for coming today.
Yeah.